Hey, welcome to Next Level Method Podcast. I'm Richard Ryerson.
And I'm Matt Lilly.
And we're here to help you take your life to the next level. Let's get started. Matt, Wayne Jacobsen on the show today.
Very
just
cool.
got done talking to him. Yeah, very cool. He's a prolific author, pastor. A lot of people might, The Shack, which I read years ago, great book. He helped write that.
Yeah, exactly. Contributed to that. Yeah.
He's probably best known for his book, He Loves Me, or that's the book he recommends that we read. But I love him because he tells this journey of, and he became a pastor when he's 22.
Right.
And at 42, kind of at the peak of his career, he gets voted off the island behind the scenes when he's on the road and has this kind of pivotal life moment.
Yeah.
And the way he handled it, I thought was just amazing. I would wish I could handle it the way he did, and I'll let people listen to how he did. But I thought that was pretty much the profoundness of this conversation was that, because it ties into those life moments, those kind of pivotal moments in life where we have to choose, we have to go down a path.
Right.
And you brought it up in this conversation that we think the path, if we go this way, okay, I'm doing the noble thing, it's going to be unicorns and rainbows.
Right.
And it's not. And he's a testament to that. But man, what an inspiration. What is your takeaway from this conversation?
Totally. I met him, a while back, and once I met him, I thought, this guy's so interesting because he did lead a different life. It wasn't an 8 to 5 Monday through Friday life, right? He was a pastor and had led a congregation, and then there was a catalytic event where he chose to make a different choice, and kind of went, I wouldn't say blindly, but kind of blindly into a new area, and so it was just such an interesting story for me when he started telling his own story. I mean, I had to kind of pry it out of him at first, but yeah, he's such an interesting guy because he does live from a different perspective. It's very purposeful, and that's why we wanted to have him on the show. He's just very purpose-driven, but not necessarily goal-driven, which there's a difference. When you listen to the podcast, it's going to be, and it's a little different than some of the other guests we've had on here, because he was a pastor, and we did talk about God, and some of the things, or a lot of it was about God and grace and faith, and where that can take you in life. So I think it's going to be a different podcast, but in a very positive way. And I think people, no matter what religion, faith, believer, not believer, atheist, doesn't matter. You're going to get something out of this podcast.
Yeah, he views life, to me, even at the beginning, the way he views it, to me is refreshing. Yeah. Because the way that religion is approached, or it has been kind of approached, and certainly my experiences in the past, he gives me a new perspective. Meaning, why? How did he put it? Instead of living a life of appeasement to God, one of affection and acceptance, right? And there's a subtle but powerful difference in there. I'll let him explain it. He does a better job in the podcast, but it's a very powerful conversation. I love talking with him. Anything else that you want to add to that?
I think people, like I said, it doesn't matter what your faith is or what your beliefs are. I think you're going to get something from this podcast because of the way, just a different perspective on life.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Hey, thanks for being a follower of the show. If you haven't, please take the time to follow us on your favorite podcast application. Go to nextlevelmethod.com to learn more about our show, but also the live events we have coming up, particularly in this fall and into 2022. We look forward to building a community with you, connecting with us, all about energy, elimination, relationships, and purpose. Again, nextlevelmethod.com to learn more. So here's our great conversation with Wayne Jacobsen here on Next Level Method. Wayne Jacobsen on the show. Welcome, my friend. It's so nice to meet you.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
When I was doing my background on your stuff, are you familiar with Robert McGee's Search for Significance? I'm sure you probably, have you heard of that?
I've heard of it, read it, parts of it a long time ago.
That book, a lot of the stuff that was in there is a pivotal book for me, but I was looking and listening to your messaging. A lot of that seems to kind of fall in that vein, and particularly of understanding what it means to be kind of unconditionally loved, right? I think a lot of my life, particularly in the spiritual journey, has run up against that roadblock of, I'm just not worthy. I mean, I got to do certain things. It's just like, it's still hard for me even now to fully realize that I'm justified no matter what I do. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to open up by saying thank you for kind of reminding me of that kind of important truism. And so it seems like your work is kind of wrapped up in that. What are your thoughts when you hear me say that?
Yeah, I think I spent 20 years of professional ministry in Wayne's search for significance. That's probably what drove 90% of what I did. I would never admitted it at the time.
Sure.
I would think I was doing it for God, for His kingdom, for all that. But I have found now that my significance is just being a beloved child of a gracious God. And that's enough significance. And everything else is just living in the world the way he's asked me to live, loving the people he's given me to love, and watching what he does in my life. And I find those things to be incredibly significant, more than any achievement people could point to that I've done or been part of. I really just love being his child in the earth, helping other people discover that same freedom.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love how he says that, because it takes a tremendous amount of, when I hear you say that, it's very liberating to me. It's almost like there's a burden lifted off my shoulders when you look at it that way. And it seems like I've made it too complicated. And when I hear it like that, it becomes a little more, simplistic's the wrong word, but freeing, I guess, or liberating. What do you think, Matt? When you hear that?
Yeah, no, I agree. And, part of the big reason, Wayne and I talked a couple of weeks ago when he was here in Wichita, and I just wanted to have him on to kind of, I think, share his story specifically, because I think it is a story of freedom and liberation. And I wanted to have him on because I think often in life we do maybe overcomplicate, or maybe not even overcomplicate, but we don't know what's on the other side. So there's some fear of, like, what are we supposed to be doing with our life? What's our purpose? And kind of what does that look like? There's the known of what we do today, but there's people in this world that made choices that weren't the normal choices. And I think Wayne is a great example of somebody who didn't make the normal choice. And I really wanted to talk to him about that. So kind of give us a little bit about your I guess your background, and we talked in pre-film kind of a little bit about, a place you came to with a decision point, and you took, as you said, the path less traveled than the path more traveled. So kind of give us a little bit about your background and what got you to that point in your life.
I will. Before I do, I'll tell you, the people I respect most in the world that I've met, and I've met people like this all over the world, are people who came to a point of choice in their life. And there was the expected thing to do to, quote, be successful, or, quote, be safe, or, quote, be whatever. And they chose against that because of something inside their heart that compelled them to make a different choice. And those are the people I admire most in the world. I've watched people make choices in opposition to their self-interest, and maybe opposition to their preferred outcome or preferred income. And I love that. I love meeting people who've made difficult choices and made the choice most people wouldn't make. For me, I kind of got drug into this kicking and screaming. I grew up in a Christian home. I've had a lot of connection with and passion to be one of God's people on the planet. For the first 40 years of my life, I was given mostly religious tools to work with that. And I was good at the religious stuff. I was good at reading my Bible. I was good at praying. I was good at being in ministry. I was good at doing the ethics and doctrine and things that were held out to me to be important. But they didn't lead me to life. They didn't lead me to the freedom that I thought Scripture was promising. The most frustrating scriptures are that you would have life and have it to the full, or that my joy will be in you, and your joy will be full. And those were, it's not like I didn't believe they were true. I believed they were true. I never saw them true. Some of the most passionate Jesus people I knew were some of the most frustrated, anxious, depressed people I knew. So it got to be real conflicting for me. And then you hear a lot of that abundant life is material things. And I knew that was not it. I knew that couldn't be it, because I know too many people with a lot of material things who are not full, who are not free, who are not alive. And so for me, it was 42 years of a pretty painful search for that, going into full-time ministry, being a pastor, having my own fellowship. And there's a lot of good in that, and there was a lot of pain in that, more frustration than joy, probably. And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that frustration I get. I think I know I've experienced that with the church, and there's so many people that have gone and wanted to go down this path. At some point, it seems like everybody I know hits a point of that frustration. And I think what you're alluding to is some of this institutional frustration, because we're human beings, and human beings run institutions, and no matter if it's religious or business or nonprofit or whatever, those darn humans get in the way of things, right? And it just seems like that's, am I right? Is that where some of that frustration, that pain come from? Just from the fact that we're humans and kind of the institutional and the kind of the, no matter how hard we try, sometimes power corrupts, or it becomes patriarchal or something. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I wasn't frustrated at me. I was either frustrated at people that wouldn't do what I wanted them to do. I was frustrated at God that he wasn't seeming to serve his end of the bargain. So,
Right.
yeah, I totally get that. For me, it was just, I was working all these religious tools I'd been given, and they weren't leading me to it, but I didn't know what the answer was. When you talk about this transformation in my life, this moment of decision on the road, it was nothing I saw coming, and I came kicking and screaming to it. And people say, Wayne, how did you get where you got now? And my answer is always kicking and screaming, because my best friend and co-pastor of 15 years announced my resignation one Sunday morning for the church we had planted together while I was speaking out of town to a different fellowship, and I had not offered a resignation. And this was simply a coup that 4 of our 18 elders was kind of trying to make happen. And we'd had some rough days coming into that, so I was ready. Now, boy, I've got them on a lie. I can come in now and really clean up some of the issues that need to be cleaned up. And I had the institutional authority. I had the affection of the people. It would not have been that difficult to come and clean it up, but it would have caused a huge split, I'm sure. And but coming back into town, that's what I'm going to do, man. I helped plant this thing. I'm responsible. I'm the guy. And unfortunately, I happened to be reading at that time the story of David and Absalom from the Old Testament. And I thought I had my text for next Sunday morning. Man, we're going to get into this story, and I'm going to expose these people who've told these lies. But before I got there, I got to that part where David leaves the castle, and he says, I'm not going to stretch my hand out against my only son. And that bothered me, because I was not even thinking of leaving. I was thinking of really hurting some people. Mm-hmm. And but I had this little phrase start running through my head. I have more to teach you if you walk away than if you stay. And man, I hated that. The first time the thought went through my head, I'm walking away. I don't walk away. I'm the third of 4 boys that grew up on a farm. I don't walk away from conflict. And 2, what more do I have to learn? I'm 42 years old. I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm really pretty good at it. So I'm kind of arguing with this thought like, what? I don't have any more to learn. I know what I need to know, which should have been my first warning sign that something was off. But by the end of that week, Sarah and I, my wife of now 46 years, then it was about 30 some odd, or 20 some odd, we kind of crawled into that space of feeling like, yeah, this might be what God's saying to us. And man, I didn't want to do it. And we tried to negotiate. What do we do? If this is God, do we just vanish in the night and never go back? Do we at least go back and tell the truth and kind of have that shake the dust off your foot kind of moment where, yeah, we're leaving, but you've been lied to, you bunch of scallywags. I just, Saturday night, trying to figure out before I go back Sunday, what am I going to say? What am I going to do? Am I going to take it back? Am I going to leave? Am I going to shake the dust off my feet when I leave? And I was really wrestling with those things. And I honestly, whatever I was going to say to the congregation that I was rehearsing out loud, there was nothing in it that wasn't going to be more hurtful than what they had done. There was nothing I could say didn't me look like the arrogant, selfish fool I didn't want to be. And so I really struggled. And then finally, the only thing I could think of was this letter announcing my resignation had really lied about Sarah. And so as a good husband, I had to go back and defend Sarah. That was the only unselfish reason I think I could blow past God, to at least go back and have the shake the dust off my foot moment. And as I was just coming to that conclusion, Sarah knocks on my door and pokes her head in the study, and she says, I don't know what you're thinking about in here right now, but she said, if you're at all thinking about going back for me tomorrow, I don't want it, I don't need it, and I'm not going with you. And she closed the door. That's one of those moments of just exquisite timing. If God's not in something like that, so I walk out to the kitchen, 10 o'clock at night, what are you thinking, babe? And she said, what you've been saying all week, you have more to learn if we walk away than if we stay. I think that's God. That's the course I want to take. If you want to go back for any reason tomorrow, I love you, I support you, I'm just not going with you. And that became for us the road less traveled. We didn't go back. And now it looks like what they said was true. Wayne and Sarah have vanished in the night. They don't care about us. They're not. And we stayed home that morning and just wept our hearts out, just cried and going, man, are we doing the right thing? Not doing the right thing? We were being accused of all kinds of things. And I remember saying to God, look, if I'm as selfish and independent and rebellious as they say I am, go ahead, shout it to the whole city. I don't care if everybody knows, because I want to know. If this is the path you've laid out for us, I'm willing to go down this path. But if it's not, then let us know. Just shout it from the housetops that Wayne's a selfish, independent, rebellious soul, and then I'll repent and I'll get that fixed because I don't want to be that guy. But that took us down a very different path, a painful 2 years where I realized, as we got talking about a little bit earlier, Rich, that most of my ministry had been motivated by Wayne's need for significance. Not at all the kingdom, not at all what God had in mind. And I would have never admitted that if you'd approached me 2 years before. I would have said, what? No, I wanted to be an air traffic controller. I wanted to go in the Air Force during the Vietnam War and be an ATC guy. I didn't want to be involved in ministry to begin with. I thought was God's idea. And all that frustration, but in the midst of that, we heard in about 6 months in, we were in Australia and heard a different view of the atonement that began to reshape some stories in my life. We began to meet people who were living this journey very differently than I'd been living it for so many years. And we began to hear things that were different, that I was learning stuff that I would never have learned continuing to administer this institution. I just wouldn't have. And that was now almost 28 years ago. And that sent us on a very different trajectory in so many ways, how I view ministry, how I view my life. We learned that we were beloved children of a gracious Father. Instead of spending all the time trying to get God to love me, I'd wake up in the morning knowing He already did. And I could live loved. I could live inside that space of His affection. And that changed our lives. But there was 2 years of extreme pain in that, where it seemed like everything was just falling apart and we'd made the wrong choices. And yet there was enough encouragement to just kind of stay the course. And then probably 2 years into that, in a pretty major moment of insight, we realized what all this had been for and what it is we had learned. And now we could begin to live differently. And that was 26 years ago, but I'd say we're still learning a lot about how to live this journey.
And so when you talk about that 2 years of questioning, because I don't know, did you have an income? Did you not have an income? Any of that stuff, and you can choose how far you want to tap in. But I really, for the viewers and for the listeners, it's just because I think part of what I'm hearing here is just because you make a decision doesn't mean that you get instant gratification that I made the right decision, right? It's not like, you were like, okay, let's not go back, and then the heavens opened up and the angels sang and everything fell in place, and the next day you got a phone call and you were offered a teaching job. I mean, that's not. I think more often than not, that's not the case. I think certainly there's exceptions to that, I'm sure, but so that 2 years it was more. It sounds like it was more gut wrenching and soul searching, and it wasn't you weren't an overnight success at this new life, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Right. It's a road less traveled for a reason. Everybody wants instant success. I want to draw a straight line between the choice I make now and the reward I get tomorrow. So yeah, there's a reason why this road isn't often traveled, and there's a reason why when God begins to restructure things in our life, we lose our comfort zones of things that were comfortable to us. And, for me, it was an income. Yes, it was a whole pool of friendships, 15-year-old friendships that went away. My kids were 16 and 14 at the time, so it's their lifetime friendships. Wow. It's health insurance. I didn't get a dime of severance pay from this group of people. I was just gone, and that was it, as if I never existed. And so, the pain was intense, particularly for a guy that was mostly motivated from my need for significance. Now I feel like a piece of crud, and I feel like I'm being judged for things unfairly because it's all based on a lie. Right. But that's a pretty valuable tool to have in your quiver just in the rest of life, because people will lie about you all the time. And if you care about what people think, you are owned by anybody willing to lie about you. So one of the great freedoms of all this was no longer having to worry about what people said about me or what people believed. That if I had God's validation, if I was inside His reality, even if I wasn't walking it perfectly, it doesn't require perfection. But yes, those 2 years, and money was a big part of it, because all that money goes away. We have a little bit of savings, not a lot. And I actually, when I got out of quote unquote ministry, I was really excited about getting a real job, because I'm tired of living on generosity. I'm tired of living on the funds that generosity provides. Right. And so I've got some skills. I've got some opportunities. I was offered a lot of pastors' jobs right away. And I'm like, no, been down that road, not going back. But I had other possibilities. And everything I would pursue, I had this voice in my head is the one that drives me nuts. But I had things like, you can take this job if you want, but I promised I'd take care of you. So, And what I loved about even the first invitation, I have more to teach you if you walk away than if you stay. It wasn't like I had to walk away. I had a choice. Right. One road was going to be one set of lessons and one road was going to be another. This was not an obedience, do it or I'll punish you kind of thing. It was just an invitation. Mm-hmm. And so was that. And for a guy who grew up on a farm, there's a Puritan work ethic raging in his bones that if you don't work, you don't eat. Trusting God to just, okay, I'm going to keep writing and speaking and hanging out with people, and you're going to provide for this. And I felt like that's what he said. And I'm obstinate enough because I really wanted a real job. So I remember saying to him, I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to raise funds. I'm not going to make my friends feel guilty. I'm not going to do any of that. If you want to take care of Sarah, you could do that. But I'm not helping you. And I haven't for all these many years. I have not helped him do that. And he kept providing for us. It was 1 month at a time. My deal with Sarah, who's afraid, because I've known many people go down this road and go bankrupt and lose their home.
Right.
My deal with Sarah was this: if we get to the end of any month and can't pay our bills from what came in that month, not out of our savings, what came in that month, I will get a real job. And we just never had that happen.
Really?
Every month, sometimes the last day of the month. And we were not sharing our needs with anyone. We weren't saying, we need $1,000 by next Friday or Wayne's getting a real job, because I was rooting for getting a real job. I was not like,
I like
be a
that.
couch potato when God
almost,
provides for me. So.
I like that. You were almost like saying, yay if the money doesn't, you're almost rooting to not get the money. It's like going to the mailbox going, darn it, I got that check. Yeah. Now I have to keep doing this path. Interesting.
Yeah, Sarah came in one day. It was Halloween. It was October 31. She came in one day and she said, we need $1,000 by today or you're getting a real job. And my response was, yes. Back from going to the mailbox. And she says, she's holding an envelope. She said, you're not going to believe this. And I said, what? She said, check for $1,000. I'm going, you're kidding. She said, you're not going to like who it's from. I said, really? She hands me the envelope. She's right. I do not like who it came from. And I just said, we're sending it back. And she walked out of the room with the check saying, oh, no, we're not. You're going to have to work whatever you got to work with. And that was the closest we got, was that day. But I knew in my heart, I was rooting for it not to work.
Wow.
Because I know so many people who tried this faith thing and then they end up penniless and they end up begging off their friends and people feel guilty. And who of us hasn't given money to someone we really didn't want to, but we were afraid if we didn't, they'd really crash hard and we didn't want to be a part of that. So I didn't want to be that for people, and graciously I've not had to be. And God's taken care of us through the whole thing.
That's amazing. And
it's crazy.
And then you said after 2 years there was kind of another event. Was it another event? Was it just a realization, or the realizations kind of accumulated over 2 years and then you were like, hey, this is the right path I'm on? Or I guess was there a breakthrough moment? Was there another breakthrough aha moment, or was it more of just it took 2 years for you to think, okay, this is what I need to be doing?
Yeah, there was a breakthrough moment, not as big a deal. The congregation I'd been a part of was sent out a kind of, we got split up a couple years ago. Let's have a big reunion, invite everybody. And I got an invite to come. And I'm like, really? No one's ever talked to me about what's going on and doing this reunion. So I got kind of all incited again about all the lies that have been told about me. I mean, my wife had been stopped in stores. I'm sorry about Wayne. And she'd say, what? And he said, well, Wayne had an affair, didn't he? And Sarah said, look, if Wayne had an affair, he'd have a skillet imprint on his face. And the fact that he doesn't proves that he didn't. So we just negotiated that space. And when they having this reunion, I woke up in the middle of the night and I had this letter to write that was finally, because I had the church mailing list in my computer. I'm going to send this thing out. I'm going to really give it to them. And I'm going to make it look really humble. And I'm going to expose what they did and the lies of it all. Got up, wrote that letter in the morning, 1 page, beautiful, perfect letter. And then talked to my friend who I always shared this stuff with. I read him the letter and I said, isn't this an awesome letter? And he goes, yeah, isn't that great therapy, Wayne, writing those things? And now you just need to throw it away. And I'm going, no, not this one. I'm sending this one out. So I started printing labels and turned to just do some of my devotional reading. And I was reading a thing from the Message from Isaiah. And Eugene Peterson had it translated pretty much this way. Isaiah's going, God, how long, oh Lord? How long are you just going to let me suffer and let these people lie about me and all this stuff go on? And I'm going, yeah. I can't wait till God answers this. And then God answers it this way. He says, Isaiah, do you notice I don't waste 1 ounce of my energy on public relations? I do what I do, and how people respond to it is part of their story. And I'm like, oh, no, not this. So I put that away. Don't read Isaiah, not till I nailed it. Because now I'd rather ask forgiveness than permission. And then I was reading a book called The Saving Life of Christ and opened it. And honestly, I never quit in the middle of a chapter, but I did the day before because there'd been some plumbing problem and I never got back to it. I opened up on this paragraph. He said, so many people live so bereft of God's love that they vacillate between self-pity and self-boasting, never knowing freedom from the tyranny of other men's opinions of them.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And when I read that, man, it was like all of a sudden the last 2 years made sense. So yeah, it is a culmination of what had been going on for 2 years. That was the moment, like the little plant breaks the surface of the ground. Now, all this root stuff's been going on. You couldn't see any of it. But boy, when that popped through, I'm going, is that what this is about? I've never known that. I've never known the freedom from the tyranny of other people's opinions of me.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And when I saw that had been part of this process, there was an immediate excitement, thrill of, yes, I'm going to keep going down this road because that's what I want to know.
It speaks to the power of the, I've talked about this before on the show, but the big lie, right, that we're all kind of succumb to. And that big lie is that our validation, our worth is based upon what we accomplish and what other people think of us, right? And that's how the vast majority of the world lives. We're all guilty of it. You've readily admitted that your 20 years of ministry up to that point was really wrapped around that, you were validated, and your identity was based upon your success in that arena and the approval of others, which really kind of blinded yourself and everybody to the real meaning of the gospel, right? I mean, it totally set you down there. I mean, it's so insidious if you think about it. I mean, we're sitting here talking about it now, but I think back to myself, and what led to me almost getting divorced was exactly that, is I lost that job when I got laid off as a pilot. I identified myself as that. I wanted you to know I was a pilot. And when that was taken away from me, I sought other means of approval, right? Mm-hmm. And I ignored my duties as a dutiful husband and father, right? And I went and worked my butt off in a place where people told me how great I was, right? And so, again, looking for that validation, that approval, if that makes sense. Yeah.
No, it does. That's very addictive, right? If you're going to live your life by other people's approval, then when that gets withdrawn for some reason, it's devastating, right? But then we're finding, you guys talk a lot about purpose, then we're actually finding our purpose in our insecurities and our fears and our anxieties.
That's right.
And that's the worst place to find your purpose, because you can chase down, I'm just trying to keep those things at bay. Or if you have a real religious background, guilt may be one of those things. I do what I do, so I just don't feel guilty anymore. That's never going to lead you to fullness. That's never going to lead you to a fruitful, fulfilling life, because all you're doing is addressing insecurities. Like you said, I think that's what the gospel came to address. It came to give us an identity in Christ that no longer needs these substitute, idol type things to provide some kind of comfort in the face of my not knowing who I am in Him.
Yeah,
so God is the fairy godmother, and He's supposed to, make our pumpkins into chariots and our horses, our rats into horses. Instead of, no, I get a God who loves to plow deeply into my soul, to address my insecurities and my anxieties, and then help me learn to be who He created me to be when He devised me in His heart. And that's what so many people I know miss.
Yeah, it's like we almost miss, like when you think that, I've heard some people say, well, Jesus came to this earth so that He could start a new religion. No, He didn't. He came here to show you that there's an easier path, right? Or that you can experience it now. You don't have to do these kind of institutional things to experience it, right? Am I getting that right? That's kind of how that was kind of an aha moment just a few years ago when I seen him talking about that, right? A lot of people think, oh, He came to introduce this new religion. No, He didn't. He came to show you that there's an easier way that's rooted in love, right? It doesn't get any more simple than that.
Bruxy Cavey, a pastor from Canada, he said it this way. He said, Jesus didn't come to start a new religion. He came to fill up in the human spirit what thinks it needs a religion. And I think that's a great way to say it. Most of our religion and our religious performance and working your way up the pecking order and trying to get into the hierarchy and trying to be up on top, all that, again, is addressing our insecurities and our need for approval and our need for significance. And Jesus came to fill up in the human spirit what thinks it needs that. And then when it's full in your spirit, you don't need that anymore. And that's where it gets disarmed. Now, all the things that have allowed us to manipulate people, their fears, their guilts, their insecurities. When you don't have that anymore, then people lose their ability to manipulate you, which will really, really frustrate them.
Yeah. Well, it goes into when I said that that's a big lie, that our validation is based on what we achieve and what other people think of us. Well, how do I get my validation then? Well, the answer is through God. And like you said, once you get your validation through that, if I'm hearing you correctly, that opens up, that just reveals a whole way of looking at life that was completely blind to you before, right?
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
And so what's that look like day to day for you? Because, when we originally talked, we met face to face, and you happened to be in Wichita, and by coincidence, and we had an opportunity to spend a little bit of an afternoon together visiting, and after you left, I had a couple of our next level staff in the room listening to you, and they were just kind of there listening, and after you left, we all felt inspired. We all felt like it was time well spent, and that we had been, if you want to call it, graced with something that was different than what we would have normally experienced that day. But we all left with something that felt very, we all felt empowered, I guess, to some degree, or more joyful. So, and that was the reason I wanted to have you on this podcast, because it to me, from that conversation and even today, just feels like to me that you are in a joyful space, that you are in a loving space. And so I'm just curious, how does that show up, like even just in your day-to-day? I want to make it real, I guess. I don't want this to be an airy-fairy podcast. I don't want it to be a thing where we get off here and people are like, well, that's nice for Wayne, but how's that?
Right.
I mean,
is it available to all of us?
Right. Right. So you made this decision. You're following your passion. You're following your heart. And if I'm paraphrasing any of these words wrong, please correct them. But like on just a day-to-day, week-by-week, month-by, what does this look like in reality for your schedule, what do you do with your time? How do you, because I asked you a little bit of that when we met face-to-face, but what does this freedom, how does this show up in this reality or in this world?
Yeah, and what it showed up early on in this journey and what it shows up today is very different.
Okay,
so
yeah.
I want to
let's do both.
really help people understand there's a trajectory to this kind of thing. Right now, it looks like I get to wake up every day and just say to God, what's on your heart for me today? What are we doing? What are we working on? I've always got 15 projects in my head that I would love to work on. Is that there today? Am I inspired there? Am I inspired somewhere else? Is today about spending a whole day with someone that just needs someone to talk to and unload on? It could be that. It could be, and God doesn't tell me in the morning, Wayne, here's what it's going to be. I just say, God, would you show me today? And then I watch through the day and I kind of see, where's my heart feel inspired? Where am I leaning into something that seems fun? And I mean, not just fun for Wayne's fleshy nature. I mean, fun in my spirit. Three of the words we use now about our walk with God is it needs to be at love, at rest, and in play. I think, and the play one is the one that always freaks people out because they don't imagine a God who plays. They've got a God who's ticked off, a little bit mean, got a lot of rules, follow them, I'm going to hurt you. So we spend most of our life appeasing God. Even Christians who believe, and I don't believe the cross was about appeasing God. I don't anymore, I used to. But even for Christians who believe that Jesus appeased the wrath of God on the cross, they still live every day like they've got to keep appeasing God. I've got to read the Bible enough, share enough with unbelievers. I've got to do enough for evangelism or missions, or I've got to do, and never feel like I do enough. And they live in that frustration of performance for which there is no answer. That's a performance treadmill. I know you've got a few of them in your place up there, Matt, because I've seen them. But right. Yeah, you're on this treadmill and you're just running, and you're never getting anywhere. And so this journey is very different. First of all, it's growing secure in his love so that I know I'm loved. I tell people, if that takes you a decade, figure out what that means. Ask God, show me how it is that you love me. And God doing that in a very broken world where people are in pain, people have disease, COVID, lost my job. God winning us into his love in spite of the broken realities of the world we live in that's not God-caused but human-caused is tough for us to grasp. And it's an important part of what God does. I want to win you into my love. I didn't go see Sarah when we were in college together and go, ooh, I'm going to go tell that girl to love me, marry me, and we're going to live the rest of our life together. When she caught my eye, my thing is, how do I win her into my love? I want to win her. And she wants to win me into her love. And that's what allows this to work. God, I believe, it's not just, I said it in the Bible, I did it on the cross, I love you, believe it, let's get on with it. God is still winning people today into his love. And if we ask him to, he's already doing it, but we're mostly missing it. That's what I think. I think our perspectives on trying to cope with the world and our anxieties and cares of this life, Jesus warned us a lot of things that distract us from that reality. But just beginning to pray somewhere during your day, Father, would you win me into your love? Is just going to open your eyes to see how he does that. And then to be at rest in his work. So much of religion is our work for God, instead of God inviting us to be at work with him. So that's Hebrews 3 and 4. Israel never entered into that Sabbath rest because they didn't believe him, so they never did. So there remains this rest for the people of God who cease from their own labors. So I don't wake up at any day now saying, what can I do for God? I'm at rest in the work God is doing in me and the work God is doing in the world. And that doesn't mean I'm perfect. That doesn't mean there isn't stuff in my life I hope God still deals with. That means I'm at rest in the work God has done and is doing in my life. And places where I might still be anxious or have fears or insecurities, I get to say, God, you got your eye on those places too, right? Because there's something here, because I'm having this anxiety or having this fear. So something about your love I don't know, that if I knew it, I wouldn't be anxious here. And so I pray that. And I let God over time let his love expand enough to contain those new areas of threat or challenge or whatever. How does your love encompass me here? And then I think God's a very playful God. I was a co-author of The Shack, and we got really dinged on at times for how playful Jesus was, or Papa in the book. And it's like, I don't know a God that's playful. And I do. I know the funniest things I've ever heard on this planet, I've heard in thoughts that I think must be God's because they weren't mine. And I find Jesus incredibly funny. You read the gospel, he's talking about sawdust and a wood beam, and he's making these funny comparisons. There's a playfulness in God, and you see it with Abraham, you see it with David. Yes, there's a sternness in God too. There's times where God's love and passion for us to rescue us from places we're getting lost, there is an intensity in God's love as well. But if you miss the playfulness of it, you won't long walk with him, because who's friends with somebody who's just mean and nagging and pointing out your problems all the time? We don't have friends like that for a reason. Friends we enjoy are playful friends, and even those playful friends may open doors and wisdom to us at times. Out of laughter sometimes and humor, it opens great doors for people to grow. So I find that's early on in the journey. Learn to live at love, at rest, and at play. And then as you learn to live that way, you're more open to the things God might nudge you into, or people he's brought across your path, or things that are happening. As you just stay playful in those realities, then things begin to come together and make sense in its direction. And some days I wake up and there's a book I'm dying to get done. So man, I'm just squeezing that and getting that done. There's other days where when I went from Wichita, I booked my ticket to Wichita, and within an hour I got an email from a couple up in Kansas City, said, would you consider coming and hanging out with some people after your time in Wichita? And I went, what? Hanging out? That's some of my favorite language. I like hanging out with people. I don't like doing seminars and speaking things. I like hanging out in conversations with people. As someone said one time, their mission statement for their life, and I love this, I want to have conversations that matter with people who care. And I love that mission statement. I've adopted it for my own life. And they want to hang out for a day. I go up there for a day. I spend an entire day with this couple on Monday because they invited me to. And we had a wonderful day together. That evening I had some friends over and we explored some other stuff. The Wayne of old would never have done this. I'm too important. That's seminar time, or I'm going to go home and write time. I wouldn't take a day with a person. I wouldn't take an afternoon with a woman at a well. I wouldn't go to lunch with the worst crook in town like Jesus did with Zacchaeus. There's so much of when you just live in, what's God identifying here? And what's fun to be inside it with him? They also said they were a minority couple. And I unfortunately don't meet a lot of minority couples on a less religious, though passionate journey for Christ. And so when they said they were a minority couple and wanted to hang out, I'm in. I'm going there. Had a great day. I couldn't have done anything more fun that day than if I'd gone home on Monday and been writing on the next day. I flew home on Tuesday instead. So Yeah, and the Wayne of 10 years ago probably couldn't have done that. Or I wouldn't have come back to Wichita. I mean, I was already out of Wichita, on to Newton, had other things going. And I started getting texts from people at your club and you, and can you come back to Wichita? I'm going, see, Wayne of old stuff, I'm already there, I'm gone, it's past. And the other says, this seems fun. I'm going to go find out what this is about. So I come back to Wichita. That's a Wayne that wouldn't have existed a while back.
I want to go back to something you said just in that, where you said you get up and you ask the question of like, okay, just, show me how it is, or you recommend people ask the question is like, okay, show me how your love can manifest in me today, as opposed to getting up and thinking, okay, what can I do to please God, right? And I think that simple, but that subtle but very powerful shift in thinking, it's like, it just hit me. It's like, why aren't we exposed to spirituality or religion or Christianity? Why aren't we exposed to that? Why isn't that the first thing people say? Like, with no pressure, just, hey, take some time and just figure out, just start talking, having a conversation, and seeing how his love can manifest in your day. That sounds so refreshing to me, as opposed to, these are the penitent things that you have to do to succeed in this religion, right? I don't know. To me, that was kind of an aha moment for me when you said that.
Yeah, somehow religion is always about, we've already got the doctrine and the ethics and the practice sorted out. So also we need to follow up after you convert. And I got this at 9 years old, Billy Graham crusade, went forward, got a workbook, went home, fill out the workbook. Now I know things good Christians are supposed to do and things Christians aren't supposed to do. And then I sent it back in. I got another workbook. I filled that out. And I ask people now when I'm with them, Christians especially, I said, how many of you when you came to Christ, someone told you, why don't you take the next 2 years just to sort out how loved you really are? And don't worry about anything else. And no one got that opportunity.
Nobody.
And so I tell them, take it now. I don't care if you've been a Christian 40 years. If you have not yet sorted out with him how deeply loved by God you are, there's no other place to go, because everything else comes off of that. Good doctrine, good practice, good ethics, they come off of being loved. That's where the transformation comes inside out. We want to do it outside in. We want to make the outside, conform to all these things that the heart hasn't bought into yet. God wants to change the heart so the behavior shifts. And we try and skip that process because religion's built more on fear than it is on love. If you really, and I hear this when I hear about criticisms of my book or the Shack or other things I've been a part of. Yep, you set people free to live in love. They'll just do all the wrong things, man. It's a fear of God that's the source of holiness. That's how I've heard it. And I always say, okay, then you tell me what God fears. I say, what do you mean? Well, God's holy. You just said holiness derives from fear. So what does God fear? Well, he's God. Well, that's where holiness comes from. How is God holy? Because God is love. Because God wouldn't intrude on anybody. Because God wouldn't, because he's love. And love is the way to live. And I think God wants to win us into that. And once you're won into it individually, you'll share it generously with others because you just know how wonderful it is. So it's not like you need an evangelism ethic. It's like, no, when you're one to love, you'll love. And that's why Paul could say love fulfills the whole law. Mm-hmm. If you get the loving right, don't worry about the law because it'll take care of itself. And if you don't get the loving right, then there's no amount of law that will change the heart.
Yeah,
that's why we have a new covenant.
That's right. And you get the loving right. And I think that's where the power of the transparency, the authenticity, the vulnerability, the things that we as human beings look at as weaknesses and we're kind of not that good at of those things. But the love allows you to be transparent, authentic, and vulnerable, right? And that's where the power for me comes in. And so you're right. I think it all does. It begins with love and, not the agape style of love that we're talking about, right? Where I sacrifice so that you may prosper. And sacrifice is maybe not the right word, but because am I really sacrificing if I'm fully present in love, right?
For sure.
But I think,
and that's, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, to me, it's about, again, transparency, authenticity, and vulnerability. Those are the things that, as I've embraced them more, life has become more, significant. It's certainly become more powerfully confident, if that makes sense, and peaceful. And also the fear and anxiety, which I've kind of come to the point, it never really goes away. In fact, I look at it as a blessing because the fear and anxiety, I think, are barometers of where the love is lacking, or where the love can be, or you can seek the spiritual guidance for love. I don't know. These are just some of the things that are popping up in my head. I don't really have a point other than these are the things that were just coming to me as we're talking. I'm curious.
I think it's a great point. I think anxiety shows us where I get to grow in love. So God win me into it there too. See, if I take responsibility for it, I'm not doing well enough, or I don't know enough, I need to go to another seminar, then we're going to go down another road.
Right.
If we go down the road of saying, okay, God, why am I anxious here? What is it about you I'm missing? And then give God the space, whether it's a week or two, month or two, to kind of just expand our heart. So now 2 months later, I look back and go, the same problem is there, but I'm not anxious about it anymore. And when you're not anxious about it, now you're more able to see what the options might be that God has that you didn't see when you were just trying to solve your anxiety. So I think it's a great barometer.
Yeah. If I'm reacting to the anxiety, I can't see the options, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if we're reactive, then,
For sure.
Right, yeah. But there's only one thing we're focused on, and there are no other options when we're reacting, right?
So what, I love how, I don't know, I equate it to jumping off a cliff. You jumped off of it with the parachute, not knowing when it was going to open. For 2 years, you were bouncing off the rocks and the cliffs, and finally it opened.
Well, that's a hard way to look at it, brother. I'm not sure I've looked at it that way before. Bouncing off the cliffs. Okay, it felt like that. But.
Well, I think that's to Matt's point earlier. I think that we're trying to do it, because you're right. I think sometimes we think it's all unicorn and rainbows if we decide to choose this path. And if you study any story in the Bible, that's not necessarily the case, but that's the whole definition of faith, right? It's just understanding how the love can show up in everyday situations. That kind of gives you the emotional fuel, I think, to continue to take another hit off the side of the cliff. That, I don't know, man, it is. I think that's the whole reason why we don't jump off, though, because I don't want to spend 2 years dealing with what you went through, right? That's the thing that's the selfish side of me, that I hear your story and I was like, great. I'm just going to, it feels warm and safe, but yeah, it may be dysfunctional, but at least it's warm and safe. Feels warm and safe, or at least I'm kidding myself. It feels warm and safe, right? So I guess I'm curious, is like, how do you get somebody, how do any of us, how do we get ourselves to take that leap and realize that we're not doing it for selfish reasons? I don't know how you do it unless you have some kind of relationship, some spiritual relationship with God or something. I really don't know how you do it. You know what I mean? I don't think you can do it without it.
Yeah, I agree. I look back now, and I look at the first 42 years as bouncing down the cliff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I could do that for another 35 years. That's kind of the offer. If you want to put this thing together and stay here and fight for your place, then you've got a whole nother set of challenges. And to me, as I look back on the life I live now, is the greater freedom that it didn't matter what it took to find the trailhead. It was worth it.
Yeah.
Because that, if I just continued for another 40 years as I'd started my first 40, I don't know that I wouldn't have given up on the gospel at some point, as many people are doing today, because it's just not producing what it seems to promise. And we've been handed all this religious stuff to do.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But it really doesn't work. And so then we blame God. Then either God's not real, or I can't do enough, I'm not doing enough, all those things that we get disillusioned by. And so I don't know what the jumping, I never felt like I was jumping off a cliff. I felt like I was just given a different trail to follow. You can go down that road, or you can go down this road. And this road, it's more of a trail. The other one's like a highway. So, man, it's got fancy lights and, nice pathway to walk on. This is more, roots and rocks. But down there is life. Down there is the real stuff. And down there is just more of the same frustration.
Or the same mediocrity and mendacity. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I like that analogy better. Like it's a path.
Well, it's almost like the shack itself.
Yeah.
Like the book in the shack, right? He kind of goes down a trail, right? In through the woods and past the shack. And like, that's an interesting analogy right there. Yeah. The path less traveled.
Wayne, what's next for you? I mean, you certainly have seemingly found your purpose, and you're certainly making an impact. And maybe you've kind of answered, when you're looking and you're juggling those multiple projects in your head, do you have a sense or an idea of where you're going next?
No, I don't. I've just finished a project, a story that I've wanted to tell for a long time, on a podcast called My Friend Lewis, LUIS.com. It's the most amazing story I've ever heard of God's intervention in a young, broken life, and how he brought him to faith, and how that faith has transitioned over years, and how he's really finding his purpose now at almost 50. He's a great friend of mine. He's my closest friend right now. And he was an undocumented worker who came in from Mexico when he was 21 and came to Christ that night in the most amazing thing, and seems to have been raised as this young abused child in Mexico by an angel who met him in the woods. And he just knew as an older, wacky man. And yet it turns out from the stories he tells, this could well have been an angel. And if people get a chance to listen to that story, I think it's the most provocative encouragement. So I'm kind of still basking in that, and it's making its way in the world, and my friendship with Lewis. And so that's kind of, I'm at the end of a project right now. And yeah, I've got about 3 more books I'd kind of like to write. And I've also got, I'm in 68. So I've also got part of me that says, all my friends are retiring. I should retire and just play golf all day. So I wrestle with moments of like that, particularly when the road gets difficult. And it does. I mean, Jesus warned us, this road is incredibly painful. It's through, as Paul said, through much persecution or much trouble, suffering, we enter the kingdom of God. So there's challenges on this journey every day. I'm going through a really difficult thing right now at a more personal level. But man, I wouldn't want to go down this road without the guide I have with me, who's navigating a way through it. Not the way I want. I mean, I always have prayers, God, I wish you'd do this and fix that and whack that person good. And yet God gives me a way to navigate that space inside of him, and gives me good friends to walk alongside me and help me kind of see what God's saying versus what Wayne wants God to say. And yeah, so I don't know where the next project will be. It may be to write that My Friend Lewis into a book, because we got people now that want to make a movie of it, and I think it's worthy of that. So that may be where I go. I've got a book on a framework for helping people understand this kind of Christian life. That's kind of a little flow chart of decision-making alternatives that I shopped in Wichita, or Newton outside Wichita. First time ever I've taken it to an audience, say, is this helpful to you? And kind of outline this little chart. And here is where you face this decision. Here's where you face this. And what does it mean to trust God and believe him versus believing our own input better? That may be something. I don't really know. I see life really one day at a time, maybe 1 hour at a time. I had a guy call me, a local pastor, who wanted to hang out with me and explore some stuff. So we met for a couple hours today before I'm with you guys. It's a relationship I don't even know existed a day ago. And now there may be some things God's connecting us for up the road. I have no idea. So I think people who go on this journey, one of the things you really become comfortable with is uncertainty.
Yeah.
Right.
My certainty is in him. Right. So the uncertainty of, I don't know if that's going to happen or that may turn bad at some point, as things do in our journey. But you know what? My certainty is that no matter what happens to me, God has a purpose, God has a plan, and God has a way to navigate through it, even if he doesn't fix it the way I want him to. And I'm comfortable with that. And
I think there's something in that I heard you say, or I picked up on, that I think is important for me anyway, is that you're still, this isn't a destination, right? This isn't you didn't have the awareness and leave the church, and then 2 years later you had another awareness, and then other thing. Right, and then all of a sudden it's like, life is a bed of, it's just rose petals from there on out, and it's easy sailing and everything's joyful. You're finding joy and comfort and in the connection that you have with God, but yet life still is life, and things are still there for you to process, and they're there for you to contemplate, and they're there, I'm assuming, to pray about and to lean into to see the other areas of growth. But it's a never, and I think I'm saying this out loud because I'm telling myself in that same moment, I get to the point where I think, oh, once this happens, then it's going to get easy.
Yeah.
Right. Once I do this, then it's going to get easy. If enlightenment, or once I figure out, how to process pain or process trauma or hurts or whatever, then it's going to be easy from here on out. And that's not really, at least from my experience, is not the case. But it sounds like from your experience, there's always more to it. Is that accurate?
There is. There's always, I know people might think this is depressing, but there's always bigger challenges ahead. But right. I think what you learn is, God got me through the last one. So God's going to get me through this one, and they don't hurt as much. You don't feel the pain of other people lying about you when you've already had people lie about you, and it didn't define your reality anyway. So yeah, it's happening again, but you know what? Right. It's okay. God's got a way to get through this. Right. And so yeah, the challenges are there, but I look at it like the gravity of the Earth versus the moon when the astronauts are going to the moon. escaping this gravity, whether that's religious performance, whether that's fleshly indulgence, whether that's insecurity or anxieties or whatever, escaping that orbit, getting to escape velocity and getting on toward the moon, the Earth still has the greatest gravitational pull for most of that trip. Mm-hmm. But there comes a time in the journey where the moon's gravity is way more significant than the Earth's. And I look at the Earth being, worldly stuff or religious stuff or whatever, and the moon being the orbit of the Spirit, the gravity of the work of the Spirit in our lives. So I think on this trajectory, if we get on this trajectory, there comes a time when it's easier to lean into what God wants and not so much have to fight what you want. But that's down the road a ways. Don't look for that to happen, in year 1 or year 10 even. But have the hope that there'll come a time when God's ways are easier to see and God's impetus easier to follow than it has been in the past, when it was easier to follow the way of the world and I had to choose against it and it was hard.
Right.
That does get easier.
That makes sense.
I think that's great. I think, Wayne, you're doing great stuff. Mm-hmm. I feel like we're all better people because you spent some time with us this afternoon. Is there anything else that we want to talk about that as we wrap up here that we missed, or did we talk about everything that we wanted to talk about?
I'm sure we
can talk about some more. It doesn't mean there's more, but I think.
But I think just the time we spent today and just sharing information and sharing the space, I think is so important. We were even having conversations that matter with people that care, even like that. I think that's, what you and I were doing some podcast stuff here recently, and we talked about that loneliness, that isolation, that not having the conversations that matter. And I think this is an important conversation to have because it does matter. And I think the world needs, we need, our community needs more conversations like this so that we can better understand and navigate the life that we are given. I do appreciate your time today, and thank you for coming on and sharing your life with us today and your experiences.
You're welcome. And one of the things that will help with that is stop trying to convince people.
Yeah,
that leads to bad conversations. I said to someone today, everything about the kingdom of God is an invitation. It's not an imposition.
Right.
It's, I have more to teach you if you walk away than if you stay. So when I'm with people, I'm looking to invite them into things that I think are more real. Mm-hmm. If they come, we get to explore some neat stuff. If they don't come, it's not my job to convince them. That's the Holy Spirit is the convincer, according to Jesus in John 6. He'll convict the world of sin, righteousness, and judgment. So it's not my job. My job is to love them. My job is to kind of poke around and open some doors and see where their hunger lies. When I was a pastor, I spent 90% of my energy dealing with the complacent. And how do I motivate them? And that was incredibly frustrating. How do I convince them to be better, to aspire to better stuff, to work harder for God? Now I spend all my important time with hungry people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Helping explore what's going to make their life richer, fuller, freer. And so, that makes for more healthy relationships. If you're in relationships that you've got to convince people how wrong they are, how right you are, whatever, that's not going to work out well for you. You'll end up lonely.
You can't motivate anybody to do anything, right?
You can't.
And they got to make the shift. You can't get somebody to shift. They have to shift themselves. But you can.
But the example of your life can motivate someone to change.
Absolutely.
Just example.
Just to setting.
You'll find out who's hungry around you because they'll want to drink what you're drinking.
Setting the example, expanding your spotlight. Hopefully people will bathe in that same light and see the light themselves. I love that.
That's the hope.
Wayne, how can people get in touch with you and learn more about you?
Lifestream.org is the home website. It's got my writings up there. My newest book, Live Loved Free Full, is 365-day devotional. I know a lot of people, when they start thinking God, get put in the religious mindset. This is a little thought every day to kind of open that conduit for the way God might be revealing himself to people. So that's the best way to get to know the passion of my heart. I tell people who only read one book of mine, I'd want to be He Loves Me, Learning to Live in the Father's Affection. That's the change for me from appeasement-based living to affection-based living with God. So that'll do it. TheGodJourney.com is where I hang out for podcasting. But that'd be the way to do it.
We'll have links to all this in the show notes. Wayne, thank you for blessing us with your time. It was really fun and impactful conversation. Thank you so much. Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Next Level Method podcast. If you found some value in this, tell somebody about the show. Tell your friends, tell your spouse, tell your kids, let them know all about Next Level Method. And go to nextlevelmethod.com to learn more and join our community. Thanks for tuning in.